This episode of the Better To podcast is brought to you by Kitty Mystic and DM Needom, author of the Better To Burnout series, which includes her latest releases of Fairy Tales and I Love You and Is Love Just Another Hive. Hi, gang. Welcome to the Better To podcast with DM Needom. I'm your host, DM Needom, or Donna, as most people know me as. I am in the process, because usually I talk about what's going on in my life, and I am in the process of moving. So this episode was taped a little while ago, but I wanted to make sure that you guys got an episode out. I didn't want to take a long swath of a break, but if there's a little bit of break after this episode, it's because I'm in the process of moving, and hopefully it'll be a short break and not a long break. Today's guest is JV Hillard, and his name is Joe, he goes by, but we discussed that right off the bat of why he chose to go by JV Hillard as far as his pen name. He is the author of the Warminster Series, but it's not just a book series. And in fact, by the time this interview airs, all of his books will be out. So you should check it out, because it sounds like he takes a lot of time and a lot of pride creating this world and making it something interesting and something that is larger than life. So not only, though, is this a series, it also is in the process of being made into an AR/VR game. So a virtual reality game where you can step into his book series and be the characters. But as we discussed in the podcast, there may be some changes to that. Also, he's in the process, the storyboarding process of turning this into a graphic novel. So maybe one day we might actually even see a movie from it. We have an interesting conversation about writing and about just being an author and all the challenges of creating a world and making it something that you guys like a lot. So tune in. Hi, gang. Donna from the Better To podcast here. If you've listened to my show, you know that it always sounds great. That's thanks to the guys at Third Ear Audio Productions. Third Ear Audio helps podcasters, broadcasters, musicians, and business owners get their important messages out to their audience. Rich and the Third Ear Audio team are easy to work with. They're efficient in understanding that your message is important to you. With quick turnaround and a true caring of your needs, Third Ear Audio is your go-to for any audio message. Reach out to Third Ear Audio at 312-388-5596. Rich and his team will deliver for you. That's 312-388-5596, or you can email them at info@thirdearaudio.com, or visit them on the web at www.thirdearaudio.com. Hi, Joe. How are you doing today?
I'm very well. Thanks for asking, and thanks for having me on.
You're welcome. We just had a conversation off screen, and for you guys who follow Joe in the writing realm, he is actually JV Hillard. And we had a conversation about why you became JV. And so that
I
sounds
did.
like we might as well just go right there.
Yeah, so it's an abbreviation of my first and middle initial, and frankly, in the fantasy adventure realm, many authors like me have this. So J.K. Rowling's or George R.R. Martin or J.R.R. Tolkien or R.A. Salvatore. It's kind of a thing. I don't know how it became a thing, but it became a thing. And my publisher said, yeah, it would differentiate me because Joe's a really common name, right? And
Yeah.
so, for me that breaks away. And we looked and there were no other JVs in my space, so we thought JV would be the way to go. So just took the first couple of initials and just made it a thing.
Then, of course, there are the JV sports teams, but that's.
Of course, of course, of course.
But we know that your
Different
books.
realm.
This is true. This is true. And from what I read in your bio, it doesn't look like your books are of the JV realm as far as, you're putting yourself out there. This isn't just a book. This is a book that's going to be turned into a game and possibly a graphic novel. So these books are not just, if I were going to say JV, you have one book to your name and that's it. But no, you have 3 out now, correct? Because you released the
I
last
do
one.
with a fourth on the way. It's in editing right now, and the fourth will wind up the Warminster saga, which is a 4-book series that, as you mentioned, is going to be turned into an augmented reality and virtual reality video game in 2024, end of 2024, beginning of 2025. And then the graphic novel, which we're working on that right now, should come out in mid to late 2025 when all is said and done. So, the saga has had its success, and now I'm licensing that intellectual property over to different forms of media, and in the hopes of continuing its popularity there. And so yeah, I mean, for me, it's been a lot of fun. It was unexpected in many respects, but I'm glad that I'm glad we had a chance to talk a little bit about that today. And I'll tell you something else about the bio too. The bio I put together, for those of you who haven't read the bio in either the book or on my website, I cast myself as a character inside the realm of Warminster. So I'm really the chronicler of it all, and I was asked to do that in the strangest way. Instead of having the bio that talks about my wife and the family and where I went to school, I just coded everything. And if you could decode it, you could figure out who I am, where I went to school, what's going on, what my wife is all about, and what the family's all about, and my two dogs, and all that kind of fun stuff. So I did it because a different interviewer had asked. He said, "Look, I get a lot of people that want to be on the show. If you want to impress me, do something that's different." And so I put some time into that. And I submitted it, and he didn't have me on the show. He wrote me back and said, "What is this? I don't understand what this is. You're not being serious. I thought you wanted to be on the show." And I said, "You told me to be creative. So how else can I be more creative than literally, casting myself as one of my characters?" And he never responded to me. So, but I tell you, everybody that sees it, they don't forget it. And, for me, it's a nice little entree into conversations like this. So, if you're into decoding and you want to find out that I actually live in Pittsburgh and, where I went to school, you can just look for the signs cast in the form of me as the chronicler of the realm of Warminster, and you'll figure it out.
Well, see, and this is the thing: when you tell a writer, be creative. What do you think they're going to do? You're going to think
especially a writer that writes fantasy.
Yeah, I mean, you think they're going to write, "Hi, my name is Joe, and I live in." I mean, that's not creative. That's not anything that's going to knock your socks off. That's just kind of normal information. I've had this conversation a couple of times with people because when I was in college, I went back the second time to college and I was 27 years old. So I had life experience. And so I'm in a room with all these other younger people than me, 19-year-olds, 18, 19-year-olds. And our writing teacher gave us an assignment to write our eulogy. Very much like you, I took myself and placed myself in my story and wrote this nice eulogy with my characters grieving. And I mean, I painted a whole scene. So it really wasn't really a eulogy per se. I mean, you got the eulogy, but you got all the emotion of the characters and the setting and everything else. So my teacher starts handing papers back. Most of the kids wrote an obituary. They didn't get the
eulogy versus the bitch.
Yeah. So then she comes to me at the very last, and she goes, "Okay, you want to know what a eulogy is? Read this." And so a couple of people did, and I made them cry. And I was just like, okay, I didn't mean to do that. But yeah, you stick yourself in the story. It's like, all right, I can do this. This will be fun for me. I don't want to write about death, but you want me to write my eulogy? Okay. I'll do it this way. To pivot back, since you were saying you were licensing this, so are you expecting to try to land a movie deal as well?
I don't know. I mean, it would be great. I mean, I think in some respects that's sort of the brass ring, right? I think that's the holy grail of what we do. Many movies have been made out of many books. It usually works that way. Books, and in particular in today's marketplace, for movies or Netflix deals, they want they want to see that you've got 500,000 followers and you're on the right kind of bestseller lists, and that it ameliorates the risk for them, I think, in many respects. And so I'm building toward that. It would be fantastic. I think that the kind of books I write, like many authors in my genre, would require a big budget in the terms of the fact that we've got CGI and all the other kind of things that come with that. And so my guess is that I'd have to do a little bit better in terms of followers and readership than I currently have. But I think that translating what I've written into a different medium, or in this case, media, will allow me to do that. I mean, there's a certain parallel and a sidecar to those that read my stuff and also that read comics or graphic novels. And there's a certain sidecar to those that read my stuff and also play video games that are fantasy or adventure or RPG games. There's a nice hand in glove fit. And I think that's an easy attraction for both of those. And I think, if you bolt them onto the current readership, I hope that I can get there one day. And I think it would be a lot of fun. I'm you take it one step at a time. And at first, I never thought I'd hear someone say, "Hey, you want to make this into a video game?" And bang, it's there. And then the graphic novel thing, I always thought was a chance, just based on the kind of stuff I write. And thankfully, it's worked out that we're heading in that direction. It's in the very, very early stages, but I've got the first like dozen pages that are black and white, no text, no color, that kind of stuff, just to kind of get a sense of what it is, almost storyboarding it, which
Mhm.
is a lot of fun. A lot of fun. And storyboarding the video game was even more ridiculous, because you're literally working with coders that are trying to get into your head, that want to know where the storyline, but then they're telling you, that doesn't really work well for a video game. So we're going to go in this direction. You okay with that? And you're like, it's kind of my baby. I get it. Because some of the characters in the video game, you might
Mhm.
choose to do something different than the characters in the book did. And, the characters in the book have been memorialized, and what their decisions are. You as a player and an avatar in the game could do different things. And so you have to be accepting of that and kind of step back and let them do what they do best in their realm, and I do what I do best in mine. So it's been exciting and different and nothing I ever expected to be doing.
Well, that's one of the hardest things, as you said. Your book is your baby, and it is, and I think this is where let's go back to the infancy of writing as far as being an author. That first time you write something, you're very protective of it, and you're very, at least I was. I would write with people as write fan fiction, but as I progressed as a writer, it's like you're hesitant to give it. There has to be a comfort and a trust level with the person you let read it at first, because this is your baby, this is your heart, and you have to develop a thick skin because
Oh, you
go ahead.
no, I was gonna say you just hit the nail on the head. I mean, that's exactly what I did. I took it to a friend of mine who was an associate professor at a community college, who had written a memoir and was an author herself, and someone that I trusted. I'd known for a dozen, maybe 15 years at the time. And I asked her for a professional opinion. I was like, "Is this something that's publishable, or am I barking up the wrong tree?" And ultimately, I know I made the bad pun. I'm sorry, I had to do it. I've got two of them here. It's going to
I
happen
don't know
eventually
what he's
anyway.
doing. He never does this.
It's all right. It's okay. But the concept is, like I exactly what you said. I took it to someone that I trusted, because you're vulnerable at that point and you don't know what they're going to say. But her honesty really helped, and I did develop that thick skin. And I ended up taking a writing class, and I learned how to write prose, and I learned how to write dialogue for the first time, and I learned how to pace things the right way, as opposed to just dumping information into novels and showing and not telling it, and things that I didn't know that I needed to do, because for the 20 years of my career I was writing nonfiction, and so for me, even though I wrote every day, it was not writing
It's different.
fantasy adventure. So that was a little bit different. And so that class, and then creating a group of beta readers around me that helped, with that, as well as putting it in front of someone that I trusted their opinion on. She came back and said, "This is publishable, but this is what I would change." And if you listen to that and don't take it to heart and be shy about it and really kind of go back and tweak it, which I did, it ended up getting published, right? And that's the kind of thing that I think all authors want to see. They want to see their stuff be successful, whether they're an indie author or someone that's traditionally published or somewhere in the middle. You just want to make sure that what you're doing, people are enjoying, they're entertaining themselves, but you ultimately want it to be the best product it can be before it hits the marketplace.
Exactly. Exactly. When I took a creative writing class, I had a teacher who she had published several fiction books, been on a bestseller list and everything else. First thing out of her mouth when she sits down with us is, none of you should use multiple POVs in a book. And I'm sitting there and I have a book that I've been working on for 20 something years at this point that has dual POVs.
Hmm.
So I'm like, I wait till after class and I go up to her. I'm like, "Can I give you something to read?" And she's like, "Yeah, okay, that's fine." So I gave her my thing to read. And after the next time she saw me, which was about a week later, she's like, "All right, what I said does not apply to you." I'm like, "Okay, okay." Because
Yeah.
immediately it was just like, "Oh, what have I done?" Because that's what I had been writing. It was something I was comfortable with. So I think, if you can take a writing class, even if it's just information, it gets you a little bit more comfortable reading and sharing with other people, because in those kind of creative settings, even if it's a workshop, you have to share your work. And yes, there is the issue of maybe somebody might take my idea. That might be true, but let's be honest here. We're not recreating the wheel in our stories. Everything that we've ever written, somebody else has written something similar. It's just our voice may be a little different.
That's exactly right. And I have a similar story. I was speaking at a community college once, and the speaker right in front of me told he was giving a similar speech, and his was the do's and don'ts of writing. And he's like, never write a book, and never start a book in a dream sequence. And I got up right after him and I said, my book starts in a dream sequence, but it's an Amazon bestseller, but it's important to the main character as a prophet, and he has a power that he sees things while he dreams. Others look into mirrors or crystal balls or flames or bones or they entrails. In his case, his power comes to him in the form of dreams. So it was important to start in a dream, and there was a lot of symbolism in that dream as part of that. And we kind of joked about it afterward, but you're right. And for my genre, fantasy, almost all books have multi-point of view characters in it. I mean, it's just something that
Right.
is traditionally done. It's accepted by the readership of that. Now, I can understand maybe not all, romance novels for one, or I've seen multi points of views in romance novels. I've seen multi points of views in places. I just hate the strict you can't do this, and then someone else does it, and you're like, well, they did it. I have a friend that's a writer that writes. He wants to write like James Patterson, and he's quick. Like he has 100 chapters in his book, and they're all 2 or 3 pages long. My chapters are 8,000 words long, 5,000 words long. It's just different. And if things flow and you like reading what you're reading, it doesn't matter, and those things I think might be general rules of thumb, but at the end of the day, if you've got a good product, people are going to read it and they're going to accept the way it's written might be different, and or there may be varying opinions on how things get done, but hard fast rules, in my opinion, rarely if ever work.
Well, the second book I released, and she might have been saying it because it was first person I was writing in, but I wrote a duet with first person, and it's a romantic suspense book.
Yeah.
So my very first book I can't really categorize because this dude is a rock star, male rock star, who is just out of his mind. He is out of his mind, and you go on this wild ride with him that has a twist ending. But the whole fact is, I was going to kill him off, and and I know your characters must come to you as well. He comes to me, he's like, no, 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 don't kill me off. Don't kill me off. I got a better idea for you. So he did. But the interesting thing is, as you were saying about rules, my series does not follow any rules. And when you said about the whole dream thing, my second book in the series opens up with the woman having a dream about
Yeah.
said dude. So,
Yeah, I know. That's what I mean. Like, and it's not like it hasn't been done. And I get it. There are certain things that might be that you want to stay away from, and things like that. But if you're doing it the right way and you're presenting it in a way perhaps no one's ever seen before, and in my case, I'm sure people have seen this kind of thing, but ultimately, it's central to the character. It's his power. This his
mhm.
literally the ancients, which are my term for the gods of my realm, the pantheon of gods of my realm. The ancients have bestowed this power upon him, so it's important that you're kind of punched in the face with it right out of the gate, and you're presented with the enemy at the same time. Like he's having these dreams about walking into this dense fog, and he comes across a placid lake, and this man floats across, and it gets into the whole like chosen one, forgotten prophet trope, or false prophet trope that's there. And you get it right away. You have now been pulled into this from minute one in the book. And even though I think, maybe it's a no-no for most of the time. In my case, it's so central to the character, it's hard to pull it away from it.
No, well, and see, here's the thing. In my story, in the first book, the guy has a dream about her. And
Ah,
basically in the opening of the other book, she's having the same dream. See.
oh, I like that. That's
So that's
interesting. See,
that's what
that's unique though. Like you don't see that a lot, right? So I think you can get away with that,
Mhm.
without violating these rules of principles that certain people, for
But
whatever reason, put up those barriers and
then I
kind
take
of
this
lock themselves in.
then I take this whole thing where, because I know that first book is triggering for some people and it's really hard to read. So I wrote the second book in her point of view, and you can read it without reading his book. But then I wrote the third book from the whole series with her, the whole book with her, with his point of view. So it's not a normal series. And it's like, well, that's the way it's going to be. So you got to do you. And that's what you're doing. You're doing you. I'm doing me. And I think as authors, whatever works to get the reader out there. And if they're enjoying it, that's what matters. It shouldn't.
Yeah,
We don't all
exactly
learn the
right.
same. We don't all write the same. Our voices aren't the same.
Yeah.
So why put ourselves in a box?
I 100% agree. I have a friend of mine who wrote a 4-book series, and each of the characters are main characters in one of the 4 books, and you can pick them up at any point and read them through. So it's not choose your own adventure-ish, but it's almost like I'm going to read this book from this character's point of view, and then I'm going to read that one from the other character's point of view, and you're going to see all their points of view from point of view and then non-point of view characters in all 4 books. And by the time you read them, even though to some degree it's cyclical, you've read different stories, and it's just a super cool creative thing. And but if you took that to somebody, they might say, oh, what are you doing? That's, why would you do that? And the path of least resistance. And I call BS on that stuff.
Well, that
Just do what makes sense for your
well,
story. Yeah.
exactly. I mean, so it's the rock star genre. That's basically how I will say what I write. But the fact is, I wrote a vampire short story back in 2010. I got an award, but I've always wanted to expand it. So what I did was one of the characters in the book, she's in the movie for that. So that when I expand that will become part of the series. It'll be a standalone book, but it's still attached.
Well, you had me at vampire. I read everything voraciously that have vampires in it. I've even gone and snuck into some movies that might be a little teeny bopperish because I like vampires, and I'm not going to say what movies they are, but I'm sure you can guess what they were.
Do they
Based on,
sparkle?
yeah. Don't say that. Don't say that. I'm on. They can see me. They know who I am right now. But or Buffy. You even the
Yes.
campy stuff. I just love this, and I've always wanted to write a vampire novel. And one of those no-nos that you're told about is that, well, if you're known in this genre, if you're Stephen King, you can't write a romance, right? Because people are going to think it's a thriller, or it's a horror, it's a suspense book, and it's like, oh, I have to create a whole new. But I one day are gonna. I'm so jealous of you. I want to. I have this great vampire story, but I'm afraid to do it until I'm ready to do it. And so I'm getting there. Like it's already in my head. I know what's going to happen, but you've already beaten me to your punch. You got your vampire novel, and it sounds like it's going to be a series. So good for
Well,
you.
it's going to be attached to the Rockstar series, but here's the thing about it is, when you're talking about vampires, I liked I liked the movie Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I love that movie. I never really watched the series, but yes, I watched the originals, and yes, I watched Vampire Diaries, and I got to, I did go to the vampire convention as well,
Oh, good for
which,
you.
but I only went there to give Joseph Morgan a book because Klaus kind of had that rock star swagger that I wanted to give my character. So when I was watching, it was like, okay, yeah, that's that. So I did that. But I mean, I think for us, it's like, Charlie, I think for
He
us,
just wants to chat. That's all. It's
I
all
know
good.
he's never like this though. I think it's important that, when we're talking, you're saying you can't switch. That's what people say. But if you look at Anne Rice, speaking of vampires, if you look at Anne
Yeah,
Rice, she had the whole Sleeping Beauty series. And yes, they flowered it and said it was Anne Rampling. But the
yeah.
fact of the matter is, everybody knows it's Anne Rice.
Yeah, no, it's dumb that way. I mean, I don't get why they have to try to hide behind it. I know that expect, but if people realize that you're writing in a different genre, that doesn't mean you're going to be less any good of an author,
Mm-mm.
right? It just means that you're trying your hand at something else, and I applaud that. Like, I think that's great. And there are people out there. I can name 15 authors that you're surprised what they wrote. And some of them are like, oh, they went from speculative poetry to nonfiction. Like, how did that happen? Or how did they go from nonfiction to speculative poetry? But it happens, and it's okay. And I think that those false rules that people set up, if you're a creative, there's no rules. It's all made up in your head anyway. So like, do what you want to do. Right?
As Outback would say, no rules, just right. I mean,
Exactly.
when I did the vampire thing, I tried to be different about it. So I made my vampire dominatrix
That's cool.
because I'm like, what way a lot of those people that might seek that person out, she would investigate them, make sure they had no family. If they had no family, when she was done toying with them, she could kill them.
Yeah, that's right. And it's over and you don't have to worry about it.
No.
So yeah, no, I like that. It's almost like the reverse Dexter. You know what I mean? Where it's like I'm
Yeah.
going to investigate this person, and then I got to go kill them because they're bad people. But I'm exercising my serial killer demons out on the right people that everyone wants me to get rid of. In this case, she's just taking it out on victims that there's no one going to care because there's no one there
You
for them. So
you sought her out, so
yeah, you asked for it.
here's the ultimate punishment.
Yeah.
So I
Well
mean
said.
that's the
Well
thing.
said.
I think as creatives, we get characters that pop in our head for no apparent reason, and you have to run with them. You have to build on them, even if it's going to break somebody's rules. I mean, the name of the movie that won't be mentioned about vampires. I mean, that broke a major rule because
Oh,
of the sparkly.
well,
But
10 different rules, right?
yeah,
Like
yeah,
literally they're walking around during the sun, or you've got, I mean, let's not, you're
yeah.
right. But ultimately that's okay. I mean,
Mhm.
that's creative license to do what you want to do, and you want to have something that's unique to your world. And so, what the Twilight novels did, and there I did it. See, we can get out of the way now. We don't have to worry about it anymore. What the Twilight novels did, and hence the movies. I mean, they had vampires that were pregnant. They had vampires that each of them had their own separate
Yeah,
abilities, some more powerful than the others, and this idea that they had territory, and basically you had vegan vampires. Like in this case, it was like, hey, I'm not going to eat human blood, but I'll go kill a deer. And it's like, wait, what are we talking about here? Like, what is going on? Like I'm going to eat like Louis from Anne Rice, you mentioned
yeah,
before,
yeah.
is eating on rats because he doesn't want to kill people in the beginning, and then he just finally breaks down and says, I'm a vampire eventually, right?
Hmm.
And that kind of stuff, I think is cool. And it's almost there's a humanistic element to that gets built into those kind of novels where it's like it's slow. It's not like you've lost your humanity right away. You're trying to retain what's already lost. You don't realize that you changed, or you don't realize that you're dead in some respects. And meanwhile, it's like, hey, you're going to eventually fall to this because you're no longer what you were, and you've morphed into this. And the sparkly vampire thing was, that's a little. I mean, I guess that's a teeny bopper teenage girl thing, as opposed to True Blood, which was more like Anne Rice meets I don't know what that was. It was like, I don't know if she wrote that with like hot flashes or whatever, but there was some strange sexual connotations with that stuff. And I think I think it was HBO
Yeah.
adaptation of that really took advantage of that because again, we hadn't seen that. And then you have this artificial blood, and we're going to control it, and vampires are going to come out from this secret society, and all that stuff. And you look at Underworld or other things that are like that, and everyone has their own specific
Oh
angle
yeah.
on it. It doesn't have to be the Bela Lugosi Gothic, even though that's my favorite. It could be something more contemporary that folks are going to want to read, and you can target different genres and YA even in many respects. Let's face it, every girl I know is either Team Edward or Team Jacob, right? That's just the way it is. And in certain age groups, you are what you are, right? And it's like my
Yeah.
wife was Team Jacob and didn't care. She didn't like Edward, but then there are girls out there that like the British guy, the skinny British guy that's pale and sparkles in the sun. I don't know. It's not my
Well,
bag. So
well, I mean, to be fair, I wrote two vampire short stories, and one was about a girl who basically was ill and she was going to kill herself, meets a vampire, and changes her life, and only to decide that she really doesn't like this. But when she sees her sister for the first time after she's transformed, her sister's like, "I know what you are," and she's like, "What?" She goes, "I read Twilight. I know what you are. Do you sparkle in the day?" I wrote it in 2010. That was the height of it. And then, yes, it dates the book, but Twilight and them, I mean, I hate to say it, still stands. People still know it.
oh sure. Yeah. And look, popularity, like, and that there goes to prove that you could take something and change it dramatically. Like some people might say it's watered down. I don't think it's watered down. It's just a different kind of, it's a different world, right? What she created was a different world, and you cast yourself in that and you live within that realm. So there's shapeshifters there, and they hide in societies. There are vampires there, and they hide in societies. And this is how they survive in many respects, but also how they hunt. And she just created her own thing. And it's like, well, this isn't what. Give me a break. It's okay. It's fiction. We're all having fun writing our stuff, and if you like it, go buy it,
But
right?
then
And
the
that's it.
the interesting thing though, when you think about this, so because we go from Twilight, because we all know that 50 Shades was Twilight fan fiction.
Hmm.
How did you get,
Well,
you know?
there's your dominatrix for you, right? It's just
Yeah,
the
yeah,
opposite side of it, right? Instead of
yeah,
being the submissive,
yeah.
and in the case of 50 Shades, again, it was I want to say groundbreaking is not the right word, but it's something
They
that's
pushed the
hard
envelope.
to right. That's exactly right. You're basically taking a concept that's been, Marquis de Sade behind the doors and no one wants to talk about it and it's sort of taboo, and then mainstreaming it and showing that this can happen and they have fall in love and how it changes both the characters in the novels, for better or worse, and whether or not you like it, like the books, or if you like the movies, you didn't like them, it doesn't matter. They were extremely popular because they gave people something to think about and they pushed the envelope, like you said, and it got people, open-minded, to certain things and a level of from the point of view of a woman, instead of it being the point of view of a guy in that situation, and a submissive versus someone who's dominant in that situation. And here you are flipping the script. You've got a dominatrix vampire, on your side that's taking advantage of people, and it's like it. And I think that kind of stuff, showing it from the opposite side, sometimes people are myopic and they don't do that, and this allows folks to kind of jump into that and really kind of see something, and I think that's why it's so popular. That's why Twilight or Hunger Games, I mean, at the base, Hunger Games is a dystopian novel about kids that kill themselves,
Mm-hmm.
right? Literally, we're going to write a book about less than 18-year-olds that are going to fight to the death, and no one talks about that, or we see movies like Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Guess what? She's a cheerleader,
Mm-hmm.
and again, underage, and there's sex scenes and stuff like that. And it's okay to do it, for Friday the 13th, where all the kids are, or Scream, where all the kids are in high school and they're having sex and all this stuff and showing these sins and they get killed in these movies. So all you're doing is just amplifying it a bit and changing the lighting and showing it from a different perspective. And that's why I think things like 50 Shades and or Twilight are super popular and people just gravitate to them.
I I have to ask this because, yes, I wrote from a guy's point of view, and I've been told by men that I handled that very well. But I've noticed that for you, you can get away with stuff a little bit because you're writing fantasy. But is it harder? Because some of the times that I've read guys writing women, it's been really, really bad. Some of the ones that I've seen online. Do you find it harder to write in the perspective of a woman? Or have you written
Uh,
as in the perspective of a woman?
so one of my main characters in the Warminster saga is Princess Adeline Elspeth, and she's one of three main characters. The other two are male. She's female, and I don't find problems with it. I also am blessed with the fact that my two beta reader groups are 100% made up of women. So the minute that I get called on it, it changes, right? Because they're like, well, that's not what I would think. And I'll give you a perfect example of one. I literally gave something to, it was a scene, um, where, and this was a short story I was doing on Vela. I gave to the group a scene where this girl is rescued from the sea and, is taken to this parsonage, and the parson and his wife care for her to bring her back to, but not back to life, but basically heal her from this poison and this, she was in the
Mm-hmm.
sea or whatever. And he doesn't know what to do with the baby. And, I wrote it in a way where it was like, oh, let's, we'll give the baby away. And everybody in my class was like, no, that woman is going to take care of that baby and she's going to love that baby. And I was like, okay, change it, but that's the
Yes.
value of having a constructive, critical, critiquing group who will tell you the things that you're missing. Because I do that for them. Like they give me stuff all the time about what do guys think about this? And what am I writing this okay from a guy's point of view? And most of the time it's pretty tap dead center. Other times they're off and they're like, guys, I would never say that. Like, or a guy would never do that. Or, and when I say that, I mean, not universally, but you know where I'm
No.
going with that. The
Mm-hmm.
majority of men would not act that way or would not think that way. And so I'm their sounding board for them too. And I like the idea that my beta readers, none of them read fiction or fantasy often. And so I'm reading one of the women in my group is a doctor who writes fantasy and erotica. The other is a memoirist who's also writing young adult stuff, and the third woman writes horror. And so none of us write what anybody else writes. So when we're reading it, there's this visceral reaction sometimes where it's like, I don't understand where this is going, or
Hmm.
why did you say this way? And like the romance stuff is really what gets me. It's like I sometimes I'll stumble through it because I don't read it. And I'm like, well, man, that guy would never, like, why would the guy say, or what is the guy thinking? And most of the time she's right on target. And so I compliment her. I'm like, oh wow, you really got this down from a male point of view. And I would suggest that of her two main characters in a multi point of view story that's in romance, uh, I like I believe that her male character is more believable to me than the female character. Not that hers isn't, but the character she's written is one that, as a guy, it's like, yeah. No, there were some times where there was like a babysitter thing going on, and the guy's a doctor, and I'm like, no, we gotta. I know this might be going down the path you want it to go, but it's not going down the path no, a doctor would never put themselves in that situation, like that kind of stuff.
Hmm.
But ultimately, you know, it's interesting for me to read what other people put to, and I think that iron sharpens iron, right? And it's good to get those because you want other writers and those that read your genre well to critique it, to say you're really off, or this is 10 years outdated. Like, people don't talk this way anymore in our novels, or there are concepts like we've got all sorts of LGBTQ stuff, and it's almost like you have to have them in your novels or else, and that wasn't the case even 10 years ago, right? And so there are things that we need to consider now, and those that read it often are able to translate it, and you might not see it because you're so close to your work, you're nose blind to it, and they're there to pick that out for you.
One of the harder things for me in writing that I have to deal with is I have to go back because I write in the 80s. I write mainly, my story starts off in the 80s, sometimes goes into the 90s, but you have a different realm of, I mean, I hate to say it's like fantasy because we didn't have cell phones. We didn't have the internet. So there's a whole different thing. And I remember one of my editors, she's like, because I listed that this was a novel that's set in the 90s, and I had somebody driving a Volkswagen Cabriolet convertible. And she's like, well, why couldn't you just put Volkswagen convertible? And I'm like, because there's 7 different kinds. And I want,
Yeah.
if I'm gonna write in that in that time frame, I have to make sure that there's nods to this. That way somebody maybe who had a Volkswagen Cabriolet is like, oh yeah, I remember that car. That was my best. So I tried to make that realism hit those points. And for fantasy, you have to do the same thing. You have to create this world that is so believable that when somebody steps into it, they feel it.
Yeah, and for us, it's even deeper. Like, you can get away with exactly what you said. It could just be a car. So if I said that Joe got in his car and drove down the street, you already know what happened. But if I say that in my realm, it doesn't make sense. I have to just tell you whether the sky is blue or not, or is there
Hmm.
gravity in my sci-fi book, or
Hmm.
do we have cars, or are you still using horse and buggy, and what kind of horses, and what kind of buggy, and what kind of weapons do you have? And there's anachronistic language you use, to make it feel like a Tolkien kind of novel, but is it a Tolkien kind of novel? You can make up whatever. It doesn't have to be you borrowing from the Renaissance era or the medieval eras of Northern Europe. It can be wherever you want it to be. So for us, it takes a lot more world building around that to make that true. And you get a lot of that in urban fantasy. You get a lot of that in magical realism, where there's, you're basically in contemporary times, but there's one thing like Buffy. Hey, we're it's 1985, but there's vampires, right?
Right, right.
Or like that kind of stuff for the Twilight. Hey, it's 2000 and we're in Seattle where it's really cool and rains a lot, and there's vampires and werewolves, right? But everything else is normal. So there's just a touch of fantasy that gets written into it, or a touch of sci-fi that gets written into those novels, and so you can get away with just describing, I was in a beat up Pinto, right?
Right,
And it's
right,
it doesn't matter what year it was or
right.
what is. Everyone can picture the car that you're in. Where for me,
It's a lot
you've got to
harder.
go much deeper, and you can't, like, religious systems, government systems, ethos, currency, things like that. You have to create, and people, like you said, you have to do it just far enough that they can suspend disbelief and say, yeah, I can see this happening. and then immerse themselves in it. And that's when I think that transition and that escapism happens, where they get entertained. It's like, okay, this realm is, it's clear, there's magic. What does that mean? Oh, I get it. I see how it works now. And there are rules around it. And it makes it that much more believable in a fantastical story.
One of the things, it's kind of funny because when you think about it, I was recently, because I'm getting ready to teach a class about going from a writer to being an author at the library. And so I was doing some research, digging into things, and the movie Wonder Boys came to mind. And the reason why I kind of smiled when you were talking about creating the government system and everything else is there's this scene in Wonder Boys where um she's telling Michael Douglas, you did not, maybe you overwrote just a little bit because we didn't need to know about the mare's lineage. We didn't need to know about the horse's lineage, and their history and this and this and this. So it's like there's times as an author, because yeah, okay, I'll be really bad here. Yes, it's a book on New York City from 1985. Because I want to go for that restaurant may not exist anymore. If I go look for it online, it may not exist. So
Right.
for me, I'm doing those little tidbits, but I don't have to go as deep as you. But I still have to. That's the fine line about it being an author. Because when you look at Anne Rice was so detailed in her description. It was lovely. Some of her descriptions were so lovely. But I remember reading Interview. I loved Interview. It was great. I think by the time I got to the third book, it was so detailed that I was just kind of like, I, it wore me down. I wasn't as
Ooh,
engaged.
that's a real good point. So there's a fine line between being too descriptive, and authors, I mean, and everyone falls into this at some point. Readers are smart. They're going to figure it out. You got to give them just enough that they're building the world in their own head. And I think the thing that firmed it up for me is there's an author in my genre named R.A. Salvatore, and Bob Salvatore, wrote this story about this magical, well, lots of magic in it. Obviously, it was a Dungeons and Dragons-ish kind of novel. And one of the beasts, the companion, the beast companion of his main character, is a very difficultly spelled name that looks like Guinevere. So when I wrote it in my head, I was pronouncing it Guinevere. You're at a con, a con with him, and someone says, "I'm pronouncing this game of R. Is that the way it should be pronounced?" And his answer was, "It's pronounced however you want to pronounce it." Right. And that's the thing where you walk just enough detail where it's like you drop something and you don't have to explain it. It's just there for detail and it makes it more real. But you can't tell, you have to show me. You can't
Mm-hmm.
tell me. If you're just telling me that the grand castle sat on the hill, don't put me in the castle. Tell me, is it cold? You know what I mean? Tell me what the walls look like. Are they clean, or are they dripping with moss and ivy and things like that? And that, okay, I get it. You don't have to go anymore, and I'll build the castle in my head. So you have to walk that fine line and doing it the right way, giving enough to put it
Mm-hmm.
over the top, but also not too much that you got Anne Rice like you did, where it's great to have the description, but it's almost like, is it too much? And it's like, all right, let's get through it. I could figure this out on my own.
There's a description, and since we're talking, I do stick sometimes into the romance area. When I wrote my second book, I gave it to this group. They all loved the book, but they had one problem. I didn't describe him enough. I didn't describe his girth or his size. And I'm just like, you can't put this to your imagination.
Yeah, just make it whatever you
No, they
appeals
want
to
it.
you.
So the next time I'm like, all right, there's a song by Vanity, and she says, I need 7 inches or more. I'm like, okay, I got this one. I'll handle this just beautifully. I have the guy walk up behind the girl and he's like, yeah, I got 8.
Yeah. And then you slipped it in, and you showed and didn't tell, right? Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
It's just like I don't understand why I'm not gonna. Why do you need it described? I mean, he's gonna be the lover. If you want him to be a stallion, then let him be a stallion. If you want him not to be that great, if he's giving her the big O, why do you need to know the size?
That's right. Yeah, I not that I've ever written anything that graphic, but
Mm-hmm.
ultimately it's the same thing. You want people, when they look at your characters, to formulate what they look like
Mm-hmm.
on their own. Like, I can describe that Adeline is a vermilion elf, and the name vermilion comes from the color vermilion. So her hair is crimson red, her eyes are crimson red. alabaster skin. In your head, you've already created her. Like, I don't have
Right.
to say that she has a thin nose and highbrow,
Right.
cheeks and all that other kind of stuff, and she's 6 foot tall. I describe them in weird ways where he's taller than he's, twice the size of an average
Right.
man, meaning he's a big barbarian guy. And you in your head, I didn't tell you he was 6'8". I just
Yeah.
told you that he was bigger than the average bear, right? And that's all you
Right.
need to do that. And I think that you can get away with it. And I think that's when people lose. And I hear this all the time. Like, how many times have you gone into a movie after reading the book and the movie doesn't ever live up to the book? It's because the book is perfectly in your mind. The
Hmm.
characters you've created, you've read in the book and you've formulated them. And so, perfect example, Lee Child, Jack Reacher, 6'10", right? Who do they pick as the actor?
Tom
Tom
Cruise.
Cruise, 5'6". Like, and you can't watch that movie without saying this isn't Jack Reacher. And then
Well,
you see the new Reacher, and the guy that got, and you're like, that's Reacher. Like,
it's
it
it,
is.
it's Interview with a Vampire. Tom
Yeah,
Cruise once again. You pick him, and it's like I did. He did an okay job. Okay, I'll give him that. But
yeah,
honestly, it was like, no, this is not. No, no,
yeah.
I
This is not
don't.
Lestat.
No. Now the new guy.
To his credit, he did a good
Yeah,
job as
yeah, he
Lestat. I
did.
won't.
He did.
It would not have been my choice, but he did a good job with it.
There's some movies he's done very, very well in, and it's just, yeah, it wasn't my choice. But him in Rock of Ages playing the coked out dude was pretty darn funny. But
It was good. It was good.
um,
Yeah.
now you write your genre, I write my genre, but there's one genre that neither one of us write, but it was pretty popular for a bit. I don't know that it's still popular, but it was flying off the shelves sometime about 4 years ago, and that was dinosaur porn. Or dinosaur,
Yeah.
excuse me, let me rephrase, dinosaur erotica. And I'm like, why?
So I'm just going to be honest. I've been doing this now for about 3 years. I have
Mm-hmm.
never had a conversation with anybody about dinosaur erotica. I didn't even know it existed until this very moment in time. Now, it's different that you mention it because there is that furry kind of thing that's been going on
Yeah,
in the
yeah.
last
But
decade or
this
so
isn't a
that's become a little bit
furry.
more mainstream. It's close. It's furry adjacent. Put it that way. I don't know what that means, but that's what I'm going to categorize it as. I thought you were going to go like steampunk, or cyberpunk, and you're like
No.
dinosaur erotica. I was like, that's a new
Yes.
one. That's a new one. I gotta
Yes.
add that to the list.
I was just like, and I've never bought the book. I've read the preview. And I mean, it was like, I think it was like 25 pages long, or maybe 30 or 50 tops, and it was like 2.99. And I'm like, but it was like massively downloaded. And I sat down with a writer friend and read the preview, and we had a laugh because it's like, who thinks of this?
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, sometimes it's just that. It doesn't have to be good. It just has to be something so different that it's that, like, the train wreck you try to look away from, but you can't look away from it, right? You're like,
Exactly.
why did you just download this? And when the FBI come and grab your computer, they're going to be like, what the hell? But
I'm a writer.
you know, yeah, yeah, yeah. It was research. I swear it was research.
That well, and that's the thing. Let's be honest here. I mean, for you, you're dealing with fantasy. For me, some of the stuff I've had to research, I'm like, man, oh man, if anybody ever looks at my search history, I'm in trouble.
So I've had that. You mentioned before about realism and people calling you on things. Like, the thing that I had to research was how a privy in a castle worked. Because there's a scene in one of my novels where someone is murdered and stuffed into basically a large toilet that goes from the top of the castle down to the bottom. I didn't know how that worked, so I literally had to research that. And in order to do that, you can try googling that. You're like, basically crappers in a castle. How do they work? Comma, right? And then that's the thing. It's like, well, there's this shaft, and it would go down into, typically it would drop right into the bottom of a river or an underground stream, and then they would go in there and they'd send some poor guy in to clean it every now and then. And so it was actually simpler than I thought. It was basically just a one stack hole that went 3 floors down, and it's very similar to what we have in our houses, except we have plumbing. They didn't. They just had a hole, and they went in the hole and sat on a piece of wood. So it was like an outhouse inside.
Mm-hmm.
And try to explain that to someone if they ever looked at your search. Or what do falcons eat? Like, I have one of my characters has a war falcon that flies from his arm and he uses for hunting and stuff like that. And I was like, well, how does he reward it? And I was like, I don't know, what do they eat? Well, I know they eat other birds. And you're like, all right, well, what does that mean? And so you had to look, and what they do, falconry, they give them pieces of like basically beef jerky, and they eat them to reward them. And that's weird stuff that you're Googling.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, looking up dominatrix stuff, looking up because my rock star is the drug addict, looking up all the stuff. And that's the funny thing when you think about the main rule of writing. Uh write what you know. Okay, well, let's be honest here. I kind of lived the 80s, so I understand that. But a fantasy, you have not lived that, So that whole rule, once again, we're talking about rules, you know, it's something that doesn't necessarily work if you're writing fantasy or true fiction. You haven't experienced everything you're ever going to write about. So I kind of, because I was taking acting classes in college, and my acting coach said something that was very important to me, which was live in the moment. So when you're writing, you have to live in that moment, even if it's fantasy, because when you're writing, I'm sure you believe in that thing that you're writing about. So you're
Yeah,
living
you
and
have
creating that
to.
moment. Yeah.
Yeah, you are, especially when you so when you're writing epic fantasy like I do, I mean, an epic fantasy, for those who don't know the difference between like a classical fantasy novel or sword and sorcery and epic fantasy, sword and sorcery is like Conan the Barbarian, where it's basically a medieval society of some kind, and then there's this magic in the background, and it's odd and it's sudden and it's rare. And then, classical, like high fantasy, is more like Dungeons and Dragons, where it's episodic and, there's a beginning and an end. Epic fantasy is Tolkienish. It's, there's a history that you need to learn as a reader, and you have to immerse yourself in that history to understand the present and where it's going in the future. So there's a future, past, present. You got to build the world around it. It's not something that's episodic. So for me, some of that is in building it, and all of a sudden you've created these rules for the society. So there's those Warminsterian rules and the pantheon of gods and the mint where they create their gold coins, but you can't call them gold coins because that's too Dungeons and Dragons is. So they're golden palmettes or silver laurels or copper sheaves, and you make up your own money system to fit into it. And or what are some of the norms that can happen in those societies? What's the mores that can happen? Like, what do people believe in, and what do they allow? What's acceptable for them? And is gambling okay? Is it Puritan, like a Puritan society, or is it not? And what are their pockets of different beliefs and where they are in the realm? And you make all that up, and now all of a sudden I've made a realm that doesn't exist with a lot of rules that I have to follow as an author. But to write it well, you have to know those rules, and you have to know the rules through the eyes of the character through which you're writing. So they might be different for Damus, who spends his life in a cathedral learning to use his powers of prophecy, than Ritter, who is, an action-oriented long marcher whose job it is to patrol the borderlands and keep the bad monsters away from his people. They just have two different sets of, and that would be true. And so they look at things differently. And so, I think those things become more believable when you follow your own rules and you set them and you show them in action as you write them. So you can, even though no matter how tangential it is, as long as you're able to show
Mhm.
that, people will get that and say, okay, well, that's how they play ball here. And so I get it. When in Rome, I'm going to do as Ritter does, or when in Rome, I'm going to do as Damus does. And that's how it kind of fits in.
I have an interesting question, but it kind of would have to, I have to ask this one question first. So, did you watch Caprica?
No.
Okay.
What is Caprica?
Caprica was a side series to Battlestar Galactica.
Oh, okay. I'm
And
familiar with Battlestar. Yeah.
right. So it was on very limited. I think it was on sci-fi for maybe like 10 episodes, if that. But the reason why I asked is because they basically got into, we're in the decline of the society in part at certain areas again, and then we have the upper echelon. But there's a lot of people that are hooked on augmented reality. This is like a dope, they're like using it as a drug. So that's why I was going to ask about, how do you feel about I mean, I know it's a great thing that you're doing the augmented reality game. I understand that. That's great. But do you see any downside to it, or are you a player yourself, or how do you feel about it?
I'm a player myself, and there are nuances here. And I think that there's a great series written by Klein that is Ready Player One and Ready Player Two, that talks about a dystopian futuristic society in 2040 where that's exactly what happens. Like everybody, no one goes outside because of the pollution and the starvation and all the problems. So people live their lives in the oasis, which is a society that's been created online through virtual reality. And so they put on their goggles and they create their own avatars and they live in that society. Now, there's a lot of social commentary that Klein uses in those novels, but at the end of the day, it's really a fun story about a kid who worships the guy that created the oasis. And when this guy dies, this guy's favorite time were the 1980s and early 1990s. And so he's created this adventure to turn over the oasis to the person that could figure out his game, right?
Nice.
And that's really what it's about. And so you fall in love with the novels and or the movie because you're chasing these things that are kind of, from 2040, someone's playing a Breakfast Club movie or The Shining and things like that. And you're like, what is this? What's going on? But you look at it from the person who made the oasis. That was that was their favorite time. So they're hearkening back to that, and they're using this virtual reality to relive their glory days or relive their past or correct their mistakes. And a lot of those things are baked into this stuff. And a lot of folks too look at it and say, well, I can be whoever I want to be. I'm born this, but I don't want to look like this. You know what I mean? I want to be something else. And in virtual reality, you can do that. You can absolutely step in and create your own name. You can create your own look. You can earn your own stuff. And that is a lot different. And you've seen that even in some philosophy classes where people have philosophized about the matrix. Like if you could plug yourself into the matrix and live your perfect life and die not knowing that you were ever out, would you do it? Or if you knew that you were in there, would you still do it? Because you're living this, utopian life until the end, but you're not really living it. It's all pre-programmed. Versus do you live your own life, which could lead to a variety of bad things, but at least you lived your own life. And there are questions like that. And so for me, I'm a gamer. I have no problems with it, and we're not going to be around when those things, really get to that point. But ultimately, you're right. I mean, the value of the game is there. I think it's just you're playing something that's a fantasy, and it's just like playing. I liken it to I'm a D&D guy. I've been playing Dungeons and Dragons my entire life, and so I'm role playing there, even though I might not do it. I got a piece of paper that tells me what my character can do. It's not a lot different, and it's all in my head. It's a group delusion among those who are playing the game, as opposed to me putting on a headset and actually seeing it and it coming to life for me. And so, yes, there's a lot of bad things to it, but I don't know a single technology that was meant for good that's ever not been used for bad. So I'm sure some things will go off the rails one day, but for me, it's just a source of entertainment for people. Well, I mean, they get to live in the realm of Warminster.
It's the same thing though with writing. I mean, you're living in that world when you're writing. You're dealing with that. And as far as like the video game thing, back to that, Wally is the same thing. Wally's the kids' version of Ready Player One because everybody's laying around on the couch watching TV. We're not doing anything. We're all and unfortunately, as AI grows, we may end up to that point because AI does a lot. And you've seen those commentaries in Star Trek and the Picard series. You've seen it in different avenues of media, how of it Terminator, war games. I mean, we got the negative out there too, but we also have the societal issues of, well, now everything's automated, so you don't have to go do that job anymore.
Right. Yeah. Or, you mentioned Star Trek. I mean, Star Trek 30 years ago with Next Generation had the holodeck, right? That's the ultimate virtual reality where it's programmable. It has AI in it. And it was an escape for them. And there was one episode, maybe a couple, where it went off the rails, and that was something they commented on. But for the most part, it was escapism. Like, I live on this ship. I can't be out in the middle of nowhere. So I have to create this technology that allows me to pretend that I'm out in the middle of nowhere. And I'm on a dude ranch, or I'm at this bar that I like to go to. And I'm going to see people and talk to folks. And those kind of things, I think, in all honesty, Star Trek probably did it the best and the cleanest, where the Ready Player One stuff or sounds like to me like Caprica, that was also like a social indictment about this thing's gonna punch you in the face. So have a little fun, but it's not real.
and that was the start of the Cylons too. Caprica was, you're going to see how a Cylon gets built. This is how the Cylons come about. But I did virtual reality in New Orleans, they had it at Jack's Brewery, where this was like 1995. So you had to go and sign up and pay $20 to stand in a circle with the big heavy headset and the line drawn dinosaur or whatever you were dealing with. So I mean, I've done that before, and I play video games, not very often, but I play video games. So the escapism, we all need it. And I'm not sitting there saying a bad commentary. It's just it's intriguing to see how social commentary sometimes paints everything very dark and then paints everything very light. And when you think about the Hunger Games movie, shortly after the Hunger Games movies came out, everybody, I told my husband this at the time. I'm like, isn't it funny that the Hunger Games came out and we're selling you dystopia. We are selling you a dystopian fantasy. And now Taco Bell, McDonald's, everybody has painted their places gray.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Yeah. I mean, it was just something to me. It was like, so are we trying to set us up for this dystopia? I mean, because everything's going to be gray now? Why?
Yeah, I don't know. Like, life imitates art, imitates life, right? So I think that sometimes, there are things that get really popular for a while, and there's the copycat stuff too. And that's dangerous in our realm, where you always want to be unique as a writer and write something and not follow in the footsteps. But ultimately, Hunger Games isn't that much different than 1984. You know what I mean? It had a little different story, but not much of one. When you dig into it, there's districts, and here's the coal miners, and here's this place where everybody has everything, and the haves have and the have-nots have nothing, and then you can fight together. And the concept behind the Hunger Games was, we're going to give your district just enough food if you win, right? And like that kind of stuff, and it'll make it better for you for just a little bit. And that's why they would fight in these games, and they would pick their kids, and we read about that a lot in Eric Marie Remarque stuff. When you go back to the, All Quiet on the Western Front, with all these 17, 18-year-old, even 16-year-old German kids that were slaughtered because an adult's not dumb enough to put himself in the way of a bullet. These kids can be brainwashed into this ideological thing they don't know anything about, and told to go fight at the front until they get there and the bullets start to fly. And then bad things happen. And that's the same thing the Hunger Games is really harkening on too. And, Katniss is a perfect example of that. I mean, she doesn't want to go. She's reluctant to go, but she steps up to take the place of her sister, who would have been killed, and then she doesn't want to kill people in the game. So she tries not to kill people. And that just doesn't work. And eventually she becomes a killer. And it's how that society has bent her to doing those things. And, it's just real interesting commentary that's buried in those. But you're right. Life imitates art, imitates life.
Mm-hmm. So is there anything that we didn't really talk about that you want to mention?
No, the only thing I would appreciate, a little plug, if you guys are interested in what you've heard and you enjoy reading epic or dark fantasy, check me out at jvhilliard.com, or any of my socials are at jvhilliardbooks. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, Discord, YouTube. You'll find me there. And I just want to say thank you very much for having me on the show. I really appreciate the opportunity to come on and chat with your viewers and get a chance to chat with you. This really interesting conversation. I can now chalk up that I talked about dinosaur erotica, and I never thought that those words would ever come out of my mouth in that framework. But hey, we're there. And it's 2024. I'm not going to complain. I mean, you do you.
it's writer to writer, and when you're looking at things that sell, you just kind of go, really?
Yeah. Well, why did I miss that? I missed the dinosaur erotica train.
I couldn't see you writing that, but anyway, thanks for coming on.
It has been my absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
So as we wrapped it up, you obviously saw us laughing about the dinosaur porn, because if you look it up, and I'm not trying to restart that anything, it was rather amusing to read, because you just can't think about a T-Rex and a person, but somebody took the effort there and did that. And if it's not your thing, which it wasn't mine, you just kind of have to laugh, because what made you think that was a good idea? I guess fantasy is everything, and not knocking it. If you like it, love it. It's your thing. And not everything I write is everybody's cup of tea, and same thing with JV. But it's always interesting to see what's out there in the realm of writing. So I think if you're a writer and you were checking this podcast out, break the rules. Yes, we are taught that you better have these rules in place, But quite honestly, as we talked about also, our story that we're writing, some of those elements in that story have been told before. And it's the only reason it's different is because it's our voice, it's our character that we've given it a different spin. So if you're a writer, don't sit there and be fearful that, oh my gosh, I can't break that rule. I can't make that change. Be true to who you are, be true to your creativity, be true to your power and your passion, and believe in yourself. Have the faith that you can do this and step out of your comfort zone. And I know that's way easier said than done. It's like both of him and I said, you have to come from, and it's very hard as a writer, you have to come from that place of trust. And so you may give a book to you may give your writing to a friend to check out, but there still has to be that level of comfort. I once had a roommate and she was my best friend, but I still never trusted her enough to provide her with anything I wrote because I didn't trust her enough that she would be honest or she would be cruel just to be cruel. And I didn't need that. So be careful when you hand out your writing that you can trust the person and that they're not telling you things because they're jealous, envious, or they're just being cruel. Because sometimes even our best friends, at least in my experience, are not always the best person. So, and this is a lesson you learn as a younger person, but that's a whole other podcast that maybe I'll do one day. But it's a lesson you learn. You learn who you can trust. And that is a major thing. And it comes that way when you do your writing, whether it's music, any kind of creative passion. Before you share it with somebody, you have to have a level of trust. And putting it out there for the world to see comes with a lot of strength and a lot of trust, that you have to have compassion for yourself and you have to be honest with yourself to know that this is ready to see, the world is ready to see this. Excuse me. So on that note, as always, now, as I'm sure you've noticed, besides YouTube, you can also see the video on Spotify. So now we have two avenues where you can watch the video of the podcast, and it's on all the channels. If you found it here, wherever you're listening, if you found it on Apple iTunes or whatever, the podcast, you can actually go see the video on Spotify or YouTube. So we're trying to branch that out. As always, Rich Zai from Third Year Audio Productions does the sound, and both of our intro music is done by Fast Susie. So check them out when you get a chance. Anyway, I would like to thank you guys for tuning in as always, whether it be day, night, evening, weekend, whenever. I thank you and appreciate you for tuning in. And if you ever want to be a guest on the podcast or want to drop me a line or just say hi to show, to let me know you're listening, please do so. It would be great to hear some feedback. Anyway, I hope you have a great day, evening, weekend, whenever you're listening, and I'll catch you next time, guys. Bye.